he talks about a little bit lamenting the toil of life during this second chapter. Solomon saw pleasure as the second vain thing, as he's going through and listing things that are vain. The pleasures of life, he says, is the second vain thing, but he decided to indulge himself in all the sensual pleasures that he could imagine. Seems like he already knew what the answer was going to be, but he thought that he would investigate this area. He knew that it was going to be futility, meaning it was not the answer. When he says now in verse 1, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. So he knows already that he's not going to find serious answers here. The New International Version translates pleasure with finding out what is good. And that's what he's looking for the answer to what is good that has any lasting meaning of any sort. So he says that he was going to find that it was futility. So, verse 2, I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? Well, what about laughter? Everybody likes to laugh. Doesn't it make you feel better to laugh? Well, including Solomon, that it may be a waste of time. I don't know. It is an outside force taking hold of your consciousness. Someone makes you laugh, so to some degree you're kind of losing control. You're laughing. How many times have you ever seen something that made you laugh so hard your face was hurting and you couldn't stop laughing? Well, that kind of goes along with Solomon saying it's madness. You're almost going crazy. You're laughing into insanity to the point to where it's causing muscle tension in your face. And when it's over, what? Well, I mean, it was funny. It made you laugh, but what did you achieve out of that? Maybe a momentary good feeling, but that also is fleeting. So we see what he's talking about when he talks about laughter. It doesn't last very long. It doesn't provide any real lasting benefit. So he's calling it madness. You just kind of go crazy for a minute. You're into some kind of hysterical mode, and he says that's not worth anything. And sometimes it gets old. How many times have you been around people that laugh at things that aren't funny? You know what I'm talking about? It's like, well, that wasn't that funny, and you're sitting there laughing and hee-hawing. Why don't you hush? That's just kind of bothering me now. So you see that laughter can be very awkward, and that's what he's talking about. When he says, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? Now, here he's not necessarily talking about, he will address sensual pleasure later, but now he's just talking about good times, maybe inviting people over or enjoying life to some extent, more like maybe a festival atmosphere or something like that. But what does that accomplish? Well, maybe you had a good time with friends, you had some fellowship or whatever, but is it lasting? Are you going to, maybe you remember it the next day and say, well, wow, we had a good time last night. That was fun. Yeah. Pew. Now it's gone. And what about life's serious questions? Is it answering any of those? No, not really. It's not solving anything. It's not answering any of life's puzzling questions. So now he says, I enjoyed with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under the heaven the few years of their life. So he is experimenting with wine with the same diligence that he did with his other experiments. It appears that he's not getting drunk because he says his mind was still guiding him. Okay, so this is not Solomon saying that this is a good suggestion. As a matter of fact, when he gets further down, he says that he's simply enjoying the pleasures of wine to investigate its worth, and obviously that's not the answer to anything. how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under the heavens the few years of their lives. So he's saying, what good is it doing? What is appropriate or beneficial or noteworthy? What can he find that he could recommend to others that would make things better in life? Because life is short. He's already talking about the fact that for the sons of men to do under the heavens for the few years of their lives. How long is eternity? Long time, isn't it? As far as we are all concerned, how long is eternity? 70, 80, Mama's 95. Some people make 100. We got 100 years at best to determine what our eternity is going to be. Now, eternity is forever, but as Solomon looks at things as the few years of our lives, that's how much time we've got to determine our eternity. Eternity does go forever, sure. Yeah, days. Sure it is. It's fleeting. And when you get mine in your age, doesn't it? Only because we're the same. No, you may be one ahead of me. Yeah, okay. Okay, old man, I can start referring to you that way. I understand, yeah, when people, it's all relative, isn't it? I totally understand. Okay, well, one thing to notice, we'll get to this just shortly. Verse 4, I enlarged my works, I built houses for myself, I planted vineyards for myself, I made gardens and parks for myself, I planted them in all kinds of fruit trees, I made ponds of water for myself, which to irrigate a forest growing trees. We'll go ahead and read down through this just so I can make my point. I bought male and female slaves. I had homeborn slaves. I also possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and I increased more who had preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me, and all that my eyes desired I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart it was pleased because of all of my labor, and this was my reward for my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Okay, we'll go back and discuss these verses, but the point I wanted to make is, and as we continue all the way through verse 15, pardon me, 23. That was my point for reading that whole section. He says I, or me, or my, 23 times in those short verses. Now, here's one of the things that I keep finding with Ecclesiastes. Do you want to go to Luke 12 and 16? You can, but here's what it's going to say. When the guy came to Jesus and said, my brother's taken my stuff and you need to be the judge in this, and Jesus told a parable about a very wealthy man who said, I have so much stuff, I will build more barns for myself than I will. It's the same exact same thing that Solomon is talking about right here. And this is where things, as I studied this book of Ecclesiastes, there is so much New Testament reference. So many times Jesus goes right back to Solomon for his parables and his teaching. Now, was this guy wise? The wisest that ever was, besides Jesus, the wisest that before him, after him? Solomon is loading us up with all sorts of New Testament references that Jesus himself even referred back to. Same scenario in this parable that Jesus told in Luke, just going right through the exact same thing is what Solomon's talking about right here. I enlarged my works. He built a bunch of stuff. Palaces for him and for Pharaoh's daughter. Keep that in mind. Also built the temple. He built cities. He built palaces. He built all sorts of stuff. 1 Kings 10:26, I'll read that. Now Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Now if you got 12,000 horsemen, that means you've got at least 12,000 horses, doesn't it? Why would you need a horseman if you didn't have a horse for him to ride on? 12,000 horses. That's a bunch of stuff, man. And that's just the chariots and the horses. He built cities just to maintain the chariots and the horses. And the king made silver, 12,000, he stationed them in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver as common as stones in Jerusalem, and he made cedars as plentiful as sycamore trees that are in the lowlands. Also, Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt. Keep that point in mind, okay? Verse 5. I made gardens for myself. I planted them in all kinds of fruit trees. Gardens and parks, beautiful places for relaxation. Fruit trees. The Hebrew word for parks is the word that we get paradise from. Okay, so he built gardens and parks that were almost like paradise. I made ponds of water for myself with which to irrigate forests of growing trees. Been in the water business most of my life. One of my favorite lines is, ladies and gentlemen, water is second on the list of what we have to have. It's right under air. Okay? After you can breathe, you need water. So the importance thereof, and by the way, just comes from my background, it's the cheapest of the things, utilities, that people complain about their water bill and stuff, but compared to your electricity, your TV, your gas, your cable, your cell phone, water's the cheapest, and it's the second thing you got to have to stay alive. End of that story, okay? No more comment. Well, true enough, but it only increases the necessity of it. Ponds and pools are a great deal for irrigation and for people. Southwest of Jerusalem in Bethlehem, there are still 3 pools of stone known as Solomon's pools. So they're still there. 3 of them, great big giant ones that he constructed. I bought male and female slaves. I had homeborn slaves. I also possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. So he had servants. He had some bought. He had some that were born. Exodus says that you could only keep slaves for 6 years. After 7, you had to let them go back. Then it appears that there was no joy in owning these people, but he had them that he had bought as well as homeborn. So he kept them. Even if he had to rotate them out, he still had plenty of slaves and servants. You know that he needed them. If you got 12,000 horses, just that one thing alone, how many people does it take to take care of all of that? So anyway, he had all kinds of people. He had flocks. It mentions flocks, which are smaller animals, and herds, which is a sign of great wealth. Richest man on earth that ever had been. We will refer to that again. Let me see what 2 Chronicles 9:22. I wrote that down. Okay, it just says, so King Solomon had greater than all the kings on the earth in riches and in wisdom. So, not only the number of animals, but silver and gold. 1 Kings 9:14 tells us that King Hiram of Tyre, who was one of his associates, furnished a lot of the wood and the cedars and stuff for the temple, and they had a big deal business relationship going on. Hiram brought 120 talents of gold. That's in 1 Kings 9:14. Then in 1 Kings 9:26 through 28, he bought 420 talents of gold. I looked at my reference, and we're talking about probably around 15 or 16 metric tons of gold. Gold yesterday was $2,735 an ounce. You multiply that out, and it's well over $1 billion in today's market, okay? That was just one batch that Hiram brought over a small amount of time. So is my man loaded? I mean, he's in that, in today's time, we're talking about the richest of anywhere that ever was. So, he sees all of this wealth. He had male and female singers. Great source of entertainment to make him happy. You think this guy put together a band? I'd like to have been on his gig list to get called every time. Lots of singing, all kind of stuff. Here's just a side irk when I find things like this. I think David Light gave me this information just a few days ago. I'm doing a synopsis on worship and stuff. 2 Chronicles 29:25. I think I told you this the other day. God in the Old Testament commanded to use musical instruments at the dedication of the temple. There's a lot of stuff that was commanded in the Old Testament that is not in the New Testament. In the New Covenant, wasn't mentioned. Doesn't say don't do it. It doesn't say do it. Safest thing is to not do it. But at one point in time, God actually commanded all this. So one reason he's got all these singers, male and female, he had them running out the doors. Okay. So it says in verse 8 that he collected all of the silver and gold, male and female singers, and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Well, he's going to see if he could find pleasure there. 700 wives and 300 mistresses. 1,000. Don't you think maybe 100 might have been enough? And what did they do for Solomon? Turned his heart from God. So, are we finding anything lasting here that Solomon is coming up with? And what has he listed? What has he left out? He hasn't left out much, has he? Gold, silver, men, women, lovers, parks, pools, horses, herds, gardens, fruit trees. What's left? I think that's what this book is about. We're going to get to the answers, though, as Solomon does. He's the wisest man that ever was. So we're going to get to some answers eventually. So down to verse 9, the initial phase here was completed. He continues with I. Then I became great and I increased more and more and more. All that we read through. But from the beginning, it's obvious that Solomon was searching for answers for all mankind, for all men. He would agree that is about himself because he's talking about himself. But what is this story? What is this plight? What is he looking for? He's looking for answers for all mankind. It's not that he's necessarily looking for answers for himself. He's incredibly wise. If he figures them out for himself, then that's something that he can share with the rest of the world, which he is, in fact, doing here. We've talked about the fact that man's never satisfied. The more you get, nobody ever says, no, you've put too much bacon on there. I've never heard anybody say that, you know. So you never get enough. Did he miss anything? All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them, and I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of my labor, and thus my reward was for my labor. So, here's one thing he says. Curious that all these things found no answers to the question, but the journey and the work and the trying to figure it out and all the work that he did, once it was, this did make his heart pleased, but once it was done, he realized this is no pleasure. Man should be happy with his labors and his work. That's one thing. I mean, it's mentioned all throughout the book of Solomon that you should be happy with what you're doing and the work of your hands, that there is some satisfaction to that. How much lasting reward there is, once again, is debatable. So, verse 11 brings together many words that Solomon has used in this consideration. Thus, I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. So, even after all of these things, he's still coming up with the conclusion that it's not really solving anything. Pleasure didn't answer the question, so now he's going to go back to wisdom, madness, and folly. Maybe he missed something that would help the next king. The thought of the next generation having to go through these same problems and these same issues, that was a burden to Solomon. He was trying to say, how can I help the next guy? How can I help mankind? How can I help future by trying to figure all of these things out? So I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly, for what will the man do who will come after me, and after the king accept what all has already been done? He said, we talked about that last week. Everything's already been done. There's nothing new. It's always just a repeat of the same thing. We talked about new technology, that airplanes are just another way of travel. Solomon didn't have airplanes, but he had 1,400 chariots. He could get from one place to another. You just get there a little faster on an airplane, but it's still just travel. Now then, and I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. Oh, my goodness. Do we just stop here and use the rest of this class period to talk about the New Testament analogies there? That light is better than darkness. Well, John 8 and 12. Again, therefore, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. John 12:46. But some of them went away. John 12. One more page. John 12:46. I have come as light into the world, that everyone who believes in me may not remain in darkness. Now, I just got to stop here, and we're going to have to talk for a minute, okay? Because the wisdom of Solomon and the references, I mean, right here, he's talking about light and dark. He's talking about Jesus. Jesus is using these same things that Solomon is saying in Ecclesiastes once again in his teaching and in his lessons. How wise is this man? It says that people came from all over the world to listen to his wisdom. I went back and tried to find it. I found it in some of my readings, but I couldn't find it this morning. Over 2,000 proverbs, I think. People would come from all over the world to sit and listen to what he has to say. And as you go back and look at the proverbs, I mean, all of that is just wisdom that he's sharing, and it's timeless. Timeless wisdom. But how bad can your mistakes be and still have God as our refuge? How about this one? Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 17. Come on, Thumb. Turn that page. Who wrote Deuteronomy? Moses. What's a good date for Moses? Round figure, 1500 BC. When Solomon, well, David's 1,000, 1,500, 1,000, those round numbers I can remember. Solomon's 980, 960, somewhere in there. So Moses wrote this 500, 600 years before Solomon ever born. This is practically a biography of Solomon. Deuteronomy 17:14. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it. Now he's talking to Moses. Moses hadn't entered the land. Joshua entered the land, okay? So this is even before they went into the land of Canaan. I will set a king over me like all, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me. What about the Samuel story? When they came to Samuel and said, they're rejecting me, God, they don't want me anymore. God says, no. It's not you, it's me. Moses is saying this 500-600 years before. Oh, don't stop yet. You shall surely set a king over you, and when the Lord your God chooses one from among your countrymen, and you shall set as your king over yourself. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return that way, neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. Now it shall come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of the law on the scroll in the presence of the priest. He shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear his Lord, be carefully observing all the words in this law, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn away from the commandments to the right or to the left, in order that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. How about that? I mean, isn't this exactly what Solomon did? Isn't this exactly what happened? Okay, well, here's my point, and here's why I'm stopping. God has a plan. Okay, when we consider the term predestination, which confuses a lot of people, but if you look at the real translation of that word, it's foreknowledge. That means that God has foreknowledge of everything that is going to happen. He gives us free will. He gives us choice. But he has foreknowledge. He knows what's going to happen. God knows. The salvation is available to everybody in this audience this morning. It is available, hands down. But God has the foreknowledge to know what the future is going to bring. Solomon, God put him in place for a reason. God had a plan. He has a plan. Solomon, completely responsible for the divided kingdom. This stuff that we just read about, he said if he'll keep those laws, that there will be someone remain on that throne in his family. God had a plan for Solomon, which included the divided kingdom, which caused the Assyrian and the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonian captivity with Daniel and Ezekiel telling us all about the future of things to come. Then come the Persians, who paid for everybody to move back to Jerusalem and build the temple back and put God's people back in place. Then came the Greeks, who translated all of the scripture into Koine Greek, which was only for 100 years, meaning it can't change. Whatever they translated it to, it's going to stay that way. The very text that we have, that we're reading here today, we have in our hands because of the Greeks, because God's plan put them in place down below Solomon. After the Greeks, who do we get? We get the Romans, who built incredible highways so Paul and Peter and John and these people could travel in peace, because Rome had the whole world. There wasn't any wars, wasn't any fighting, except between Jews and Gentiles and little social things, but there was no war that kept the gospel from being spread all over the world. This is God's plan. And Solomon was a major part of that plan. And why do you think? Well, Allison, I really appreciate that verse. I read it once or twice when we were back there, and now I've read it over and over again. I didn't know this one. 2 Samuel 12 and 24. It's at the death of David's son that he had with Bathsheba in their affair. 24 says, Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, went into her and lay with her, and she gave birth to a son, and he named him Solomon. Now the Lord loved him and sent word through Nathan the prophet, and he named him Jedediah for the Lord's sake. The name Jedediah translates to beloved of the Lord. God sends Nathan, his prophet, and says, name this child Jedediah, because I love him. God loves Solomon. Everybody knows John 3:16. Who else does God love? Only Christians? Only good people? God loved the whole world. God loved Solomon. And we see this playing out. Made him angry, it said. But it wasn't over for Solomon, that's for sure. Verse 14, And the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. So he's looking at this wisdom worth the foolishness. He says, a fool deserves to die because he's foolish. A wise man should live on because of his wisdom. It should, if you compare those, wise versus fool, light versus dark. But Solomon says, in the end, what's going to happen to both of them? Both of them are going to die. So, therefore, wisdom isn't the solution to the problems of life. Then I said to myself, as the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. So then why have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. Now, knowledge and wisdom, those are things that help us through life. But the lasting effect of searching for the wisdom and those things, Solomon said, this too is vanity. Okay, where are we? 16. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, insomuch as the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and how the fool die alike. So, we're not talking about the concept of life after death here, what will be remembered. What advantage did he think wisdom would give him? A fool deserves to die because he's a fool, meaning, the wise man should live on. The legacy, even if one has to die for future generations, should make the wisdom not in vain, you would think, if he's helping. But anyway, we see a summary of it in verse 17. So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after the wind. Is there anything more futile than trying to chase the wind? You think we're going to catch it? I mean, a sailboat kind of uses it some, but if it stops blowing and changes direction, where is he now? Chasing the wind is a great analogy that Solomon continues to use here. So, how has man has failed to figure out how to control his estate? This is where we continue. I hated, in verse 18, we got to hurry. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether or not he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he'll have control over the fruit of my labors for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. He hated his work because he would die and leave it to somebody else, and he don't know what they're going to do with it. How many times have we seen it in this life? Very wealthy people who have left all their inheritance to their kids and threw it away. So that's what Solomon's talking about, his labor and all his works. What's that going to be worth if it all gets thrown away? And I've spent my whole life, my hands, my knees, my working for everything I've got, and now where is it? It doesn't belong to me. And they may do something worthwhile with it, but they may very well throw every bit of it away. Who knows if they will be wise or a fool? When there's a man who has labored in his wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives to his legacy one who has not labored with him. Is he wise? What is he saying? That's why people throw it away, because they didn't work for it. They don't have an appreciation for it. This is the wisdom of a man who's seeing life as it is. You didn't work for it, so it's not worth anything to you. I worked for it. That's why I'm trying to hold on to it and feel like it's worth. But somebody who doesn't, one who has not labored. One man was a wise businessman, left it include the work ethic. He didn't teach his son. He just gave his children the stuff. He didn't give them the work ethic of how it came about. And I keep going back to John here. Let's see what John 6:63 says. I think I keep putting these things in there from the New Testament just to remind myself how much of this stuff carried through. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. This is Jesus talking here. Isn't he saying exactly what Solomon was saying 900 years before Jesus was born? What's coming from the flesh? What are you going to gain from the works of the flesh? It's the works of the Spirit that are going to be lasting. See, Solomon, man, is all over this. Okay, 22:23. For what does a man get in all his labor and his striving with which he does under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. All the wealth and all the things are worthless, and all it does when you've got a lot is keep you up at night worrying about whether you're going to lose it or whether it's coming or going or what else you're going to do about it. There's no lasting value to it, Solomon says, even keeping you awake at night. Now then, we've got a major break in the groove here. God now comes into this discussion. We're almost at the end of chapter 2 before this ever comes up. It's a turning point in the preacher's sermon. Now he begins to emphasize that various aspects like life can have value with God. So far he's built an argument based on faulty conclusions, leading his audience to a climax, but now it shifts. Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay, I thought somebody said. A person's viewpoint shift when all these things are viewed without God. With God, we have a different story. Now he's telling us that things are good. Verse 24, there is nothing better for a man than to eat, drink, and to tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, because it is from the hand of God. Now from chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 23, God's name has only been mentioned one time, and it was to blame God for the labor of the world at what he's done in verse 13 of chapter 1. Blaming God for man's troubles. Up until now, nothing seems to be good. From now on, God is given the glory. Okay, I wanted to read this, but life is a gift from God. Life should be enjoyed. I've got 10 script references in Ecclesiastes to all of this. Injustices will be corrected by God. God is in control. Man is instructed to please God, remember Him, and fear Him. So now these things are coming up with Solomon talking about God. It's totally different from before. God showing the focus. All men should fear God and keep His commandments. Verse 25, for who can eat and who can have enjoyment without Him? Where's our food come from? Where does our enjoyment of life come from? He says up here it's a gift of God. God's given us this stuff. So we see the focus turning now once we put God into the equation. Without God, it's all no good. Everything that He's done, all He's listed, everything He's tried to accomplish, none of that's any good if God is not in our life. Man cannot find joy without God. Now the efforts, all of this alone, now it shifts to faith in God. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs 3:6. That's just a short one. I should have remembered it. Proverbs 3:6 says, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. That's Solomon still talking. Okay? So this man knows what he's talking about. Verse 26 we'll be able to finish. For to a person who is good in his sight, He has given wisdom and knows, to a person who is good in his sight, He has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. While to the sinner He has given the task of gathering and collecting so that they may give to the one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. 4 references to God right here in this one verse. In His sight, He has given, and in God's sight. Now wisdom that was worthless is God-given. What about this sinner here who's given the task of gathering that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight? What about the 5 and the 2 and the 1 talent? What did the guy do with the 1 talent? Buried it. He didn't do anything with it. What happened to it? Took that and gave it to the one who had 5. Okay. Here's Jesus again saying exactly what Solomon's talking about. Jesus is referring back to this stuff. Not that Jesus didn't know that, but I mean, this is all given from the Spirit. Where does it all come from? It all comes from the Holy Spirit. Where's Jesus getting His information? From God, from the Holy Spirit. He is God. So we see the continual references of this magnificent book of Ecclesiastes. In addition to knowledge, having God in one's life provides what? You got that part right. What about Philippians 4 and 7? Philippians 4:7. We know what that one says? And the peace that goes further than all of mankind's understanding. That's what we get with God. A peace from all of this futility and all of this striving after the will and all of this search for wisdom and all of the labors of our hands, God is the answer. And from this point on, Solomon begins to examine life with God and the peace that comes that is beyond our comprehension. That's all I got. Thank you for your attention this morning. We'll go for chapter 3 next week. And as the chapters get longer, I'll have to talk faster.